Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today to talk about building collaborative organizations. I'd like to share with you a framework to think about the kinds of leadership that are required in a collaborative organization. And I also want to share some very specific ideas for what human resources can do to strengthen the collaborative fabric within your business. But before I do that, let's start by thinking for just a second about why collaborative organizations are so important today. And to do that, I'd like you to reflect for a moment on the great companies that you think will exist in 2030. In other words, imagine your child becomes a historian, and 40 years from now, your child writes a book about 2030, about the great companies of 2030. Think about what those companies will be like. What will they be doing? What kinds of activities will they be great at? You know, if you think back into previous centuries, we would have said things like they would have standardized manufacturing. They would have been highly efficient. They would have made goods at great scale and low cost. But I bet if you think about 2030, you would agree with me that those won't be the kinds of things that a historian will write about when they reflect back on 2030 now. The most memorable companies, the ones that will be symbolic of the time, will be companies that do things quite differently. And of course, one of the key focus of this conference is to help you think about how to be on that list. Will your company be one of the great companies of 2030? And if so, what will you be doing? Think about the kinds of activities that you need to do really well in order to set yourself apart over the decade ahead. Now, I suspect that kind of work will involve some of these kinds of things, maybe all of them. They'll involve things like innovating. I think innovation will be one of the core requirements for companies to be what I like to call iconic in the years ahead. In order to stand out, you'll have to be able to invent new things. And I define innovation as bringing together, combining different types of knowledge or ideas or insights to make something better. You'll probably have to be really good at what I call sensing, that ability to connect with the external world, with what's happening around you, with customers, with other trends, to anticipate the market and environmental shifts. I think you're going to have to be really good at collecting information, at having the kinds of connections that allow you to gather together information that will create value, not just information for information's sake, but valuable information that can be transferred into useful knowledge for your customers. I think you'll have to have an intimate relationship with your customers that will enable you to customize what you do for them, so that you'll have insightful relationships and be able to understand what they want, maybe even before they know they want it. You'll have to be able to know what to share, to be able to figure out what would be valuable to me. I don't want to have everything dumped in my direction, but you'll need to know what will be the most valuable and disseminate that effectively. Clearly, we'll have to all be able to adapt, to be able to make changes, to have agility, and we'll have to be able to learn, to bring in ideas and forge them into the way we do things, to embed them, to make learning stick within our practices. You might notice as I talked about this list that they all have a couple of elements in common. One is, I like to use the phrase, mobilizing intelligence. I think all of these have something to do with bringing about information in ways that makes it more powerful, mobilizing it, making the knowledge of our organizations, of our relationships with customers, etc., more active and more powerful, mobilizing intelligence. And they also all have something very importantly to do with collaborating. They're about bringing things together, bringing ideas together, bringing people together, getting close enough to people to be able to get insights. They all have at their heart this idea of collaboration. So that's why we're talking about collaboration today. The question becomes, what do you need to do to build an organization that will be wonderfully capable at mobilizing intelligence and collaborating as you go forward? Now, let me put right up front, I don't think it's easy. And the reason I don't think it's easy is that most organizations still act like they're running machines. Naturally so. I'm not saying this to be critical because, of course, we come out of a machine era where mastering how to manage machines efficiently was a very important part of our success. But the kinds of practices that we develop to do that aren't going to serve us well going forward. So we carry forward often old assumptions without questioning them. And these assumptions include things like, well, we need to have command and control authority. Now, here's a good example. Command and control authority was brilliant if you're trying to optimize a machine. But it doesn't work at all for collaboration and mobilizing intelligence. We come out of an era where we relied extensively on utilization metrics. We love utilization metrics, and we crave the efficiency of mass production. We like bureaucratic structures, and by that I mean complex structures that allow lots of people to weigh in on all sorts of different decisions. We like consistency and predictability. We don't want any variation. And we like to keep those customers just a little bit separate, a little distance, so they're not quite in on all of the information that we might have. A little bit of a win-lose, zero-sum philosophy. Now, again, let me say, if you plan to compete going forward on the basis of scale and efficiency and cost, I would say these ways of operating are brilliant. You should continue with them, full stop. They're great. But if you believe, as I do, that the great companies 10 years from now will not be competing solely on the basis of efficiency and scale and cost, but rather will rely on collaboration and mobilizing intelligence, I will assure you that these assumptions will kill that. You cannot do it. And so what can you do? How do you mobilize intelligence, for example? It's a really interesting concept to begin to think about. Again, think of mobilizing intelligence at the individual level. You want to mobilize my intelligence, meaning you want me to think. You want me to give you my best thoughts. How are you going to make me do that? Well, I would suggest to you, you really can't. You can't standardize it and tell me that if I follow a specific process, I'm going to come up with the best thoughts possible. You can't really require me to do it, or at least if you do, you won't really know that I did it. I mean, I might tell you I gave it my best, but you don't know. It's a little bit, in fact, like an old saying about dragging a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. That's a little bit what it's like to try to get employees to mobilize their intelligence. So what do you do? How do you get employees to really want to mobilize intelligence, to collaborate, to share information in productive ways? The simple answer is that you have to create an environment. And it has to be an environment where several things are true. One, where people want to be part of it. They actively choose to join your environment. And two, they have to want to do great work. They actively choose to give you their very best work. These are the keys to collaboration and to mobilizing intelligence. They're the keys to becoming iconic companies in 2030. Notice the shift in the role that implies for both leaders of business units and also leaders of human resource organizations. Because in the past, we've been setting policies and managing to standards and getting people to conform to roles that we've defined. This is very different. Now we're trying to coax people, in a sense, to get them to choose us. And that idea of switching from us choosing them and telling them what to do to them choosing us is the big change that you must go through today. Basically, you need to make it easy, or at least more likely than not, for people to do the kind of work that you value. Now, I've had the wonderful privilege over a long career of working with many different leaders. I've studied them, I've worked with them, I've seen leaders who are really good at creating great environments, and I've seen leaders who struggle. And out of that work, I've concluded that the keys, the framework, if you will, has four important components. The components of creating a great collaborative environment are these. One, you must, what I call, disrupt. And by that I mean you have to always be thinking about whether your environment is filled with new ideas. Organizations that are stale, that try to close off the outside world, that say we've got the answers, we don't need to talk to others, are doomed for failure. So leaders have to be active forces in making sure they're bringing in new ideas and new ways of thinking and disruptive perspectives, always infusing that in. Great leaders do that really well and consistently. The second thing I've noticed great leaders do is they intrigue. Now, what I mean by that is they ask questions. They do things that draw me in intellectually so that I want to be part of thinking about a solution. Great leaders ask more questions than they give orders. And so you need to begin to switch from instructing people what to do to asking people, asking them questions about how might we do this better. And that sense of intriguing them to be part of the solution is an important element of creating this environment. We often use words like empowerment and so forth, which are fine, but I always struggle with what does that mean? And here's a practical suggestion for what empowerment means. It means asking me a question. That empowers me. So ask questions. The third element is what I call connect. Now this one has to do with making it easy to share insights and ideas. Often organizations have a lot of roadblocks to doing that well. It's hard. It's hard to find the right person who might be interested in this idea. It's hard to find the time because my time is being wasted. Whatever. As a leader, we have to think about streamlining and making it easy for the right people to be in touch with the kind of people who would benefit from the ideas they're likely to have. I'll talk more about how to do that in a moment. And the final, which you might think of almost as the spark that puts all of this in motion, is people have to care. They have to be engaged. So even if you've got lots of great ideas and lots of great questions and it's easy to find the right people, if I don't care, I'm not going to do it. That's the simple truth. So getting me engaged, getting me to care is critical. And that has to do with building a meaningful and tangible purpose. This is the framework for building a collaborative environment. And as you think about your organization, ask yourself, do you have enough new perspectives? Do leaders ask questions or do they give orders? Is it easy for people to share ideas, can find the people who would benefit from those ideas? And do we have a meaningful and tangible purpose? Where you're short is where you should put your energy. You need to strengthen areas where you're not doing as much as you could yet today. Let me say just a little bit more about each of these four. And by the way, if you'd like more information, be sure to ask in the Q&A, and I'd even be happy to send you some documents or refer you to documents that would tell you more about each one. So disrupt. I said that's about a continual infusion of new perspectives, and in some ways, it's the simplest thing to do, and yet the one we often overlook. So it has to do with bringing provocative or unsettling ideas in. And of course, there are hundreds of ways to do that. You could hire people, bring in speakers, bring in customers, send around articles, lots of ways to make sure there's new thinking. A lot of it has to do with your attitude, your openness and enthusiasm for those new ideas. You can send people out. The old, send people out to visit places. I said here, play in the intersections. That means play where there's action. Get people out where stuff is happening, where things are changing, and let them see what others are doing. And of course, as a leader, you have to legitimize and celebrate the diverse ideas and perspectives. Intrigue. This one's actually, interestingly, I would say almost maybe the hardest for leaders that I've worked with in the past, because we're so accustomed to giving orders, to giving instructions. And the idea of switching from a declarative statement where we give an instruction to a question where we ask someone's opinion is hard for a lot of us. But it's that magic that will actually engage people's minds more powerfully. So you want to draw them in with these intriguing questions. Now, by the way, how do we improve profitability is not an intriguing question. I've yet to find anyone who is highly intrigued by that question. Intriguing questions have to do with things like, how do you think this technology will change the way our customers want to receive our service? That's interesting. How might we use this change in the environment to change the kinds of ways we interact with others? That's interesting. So look for interesting questions that have an element of creativity. And some of the tools that I would offer to you to do that are to do things like get out there and spend time watching the environment. Watch your customers, spend time with them, not necessarily interviewing them, but watching what they're doing. Try to identify what the important tensions are in their use of your product, where the unmet needs are, where the opportunities might be. One of my favorite formulations of a question is, how might we? How might we do that? And then encourage experimentation. Ask people to just try it. If we don't know, don't debate it forever. Just say, let's try it and see how it might work. Intrigue people and draw them into the process of finding solutions. Now, If intrigue was one of the hardest, I'd have to say connect is probably one of the simplest. But again, it's something that requires an element of discipline. In the research that we've done, we've found that one of the most important bottom line elements is the existence of trust-based relationships. So at the bottom line, you have to ask yourself, do the people that I want or need to share ideas know and trust each other? I'll give you a simple example. I am often called into organizations where they want, let's say, R&D to interact more effectively with marketing. But when I really push to understand those relationships, I find out they don't know each other well. They don't trust each other. They may think of the other as kind of the other. And so the idea of helping them really come to know and respect each other becomes an important first step in getting the kind of collaboration that we're seeking. Build trust-based relationships. You can help develop networks. So this is a picture here of a network map. I don't know how many of you have done network mapping. It's a wonderful tool. It's a way of understanding not who reports to whom formally, but who interacts with whom informally. So develop those informal network maps and then use them as a leader to strengthen them. Find the people who are the outliers and make some introductions. Find the people who are the bottlenecks. Everybody has to speak to them every day. And find ways to introduce paths that, don't cut them out, but that add additional layers of opportunity for communication in the organization. Be sure things are efficient and easy. This kind of surprised me when we did the research, but it turns out that inefficiency, bureaucracy, too many meetings, wasted time, too much paperwork, all of that acts against people behaving in a connected way. It's almost like people say, well, the organization wastes my time. I'm not going to invest any extra effort. So be very respectful of people's time. And of course, role model the behaviors yourself that you want others to follow. The final element of the framework I call engage, and this is about creating a sense of meaning, a tangible sense of meaning. And by meaning, I mean identity. What is it that makes it special to be part of your organization? You should be able to answer that question. No, let me correct you. You must be able to answer that question. You must be able to tell me why it's special to be part of your organization. It has to do with communicating something that is unique and compelling. And then you have to understand what that promises, what that translates to in terms of what I would expect. And you have to deliver in a very tangible way. So all three of those things are important. And I'll come back and talk a little more about those in terms of HR's role in helping to ensure that that happens. But before I do, let me just emphasize that I think the more unique you can be, the easier it will be to create this sense of meaningful engagement. I love companies that tell me not everyone would want to work here. Some people love it, and other people wouldn't like it. I think that's great. So if you have that feeling about your organization, don't change it. Don't feel like you have to appeal to everyone, because honestly, you can't. You can't effectively appeal to everyone. You end up being for everyone. So be really great for some people and don't worry about the rest. You want to have an organization that people are passionate to be part of and recognize it won't work necessarily for every single person. Those are the four elements of the framework. And as you think about your organization, assess it against those four. And as you think about future leaders, assess them against the four. Are they good at bringing in disruptive ideas? Do they ask questions? Do they make it easy for people to know and form good relationships? And do they live in real, tangible reality the meaning of the organization? These are the people you want leading your organization over the decade ahead. Now, I'd like to switch and offer you just a few tips about how HR in particular can play an important role in creating stronger organizations. I'll go through these relatively quickly, and I'm happy to talk about them more during the questions. The first is, I strongly believe we need to move toward project-based organizations. The idea of role-based positions is coming to an end. Role-based positions were great in an industrial world, but in a knowledge world, titles should be time-bound and action-oriented or outcome-oriented. They should be of varying lengths, some short, some long. People should be allowed to bid on which projects would be most interesting to them or would fit their career plans best. And importantly, you want to increasingly move to paying some portion based on the outcome of the project, whether that's a bonus component. In some cases, it may be the entire compensation. You as an HR organization should begin to think more like a talent agency. So tapping individuals, whether they're inside the organization or outside, who are best suited for the work that needs to be done. You should begin to think about developing a network of multiple resources that you can touch whenever needed to fill a particular project's talent requirements. And the bottom line of that is, you should, I like to say, own less. Now, this certainly has a meaning in a tangible physical asset, but I would also say less full-time employment, because full-time employment is, of course, kind of a human equivalent of, if you will, owning someone. So begin to think about creating networks of connections, some assets, both human and physical, that you'll have full-time, that you'll either own the asset or fully employ the individual, but some that you'll tap into on a part-time basis, rented, contingent, or maybe even shared with others. One of the beauties of this is it gives you more options. As things change, it becomes easier to change from one strategy to another if you're not locked into ownership. So begin right now to identify a variety of resources. They may be functions, they may be facilities, they may be people that it does make sense to own. There certainly are many. And begin to embrace a variety of flexible arrangements, renting, contracting, sharing, for many of the others. Let me give you a quick guide to get started. Here's how I might classify some of the assets or positions or people. First of all, if you're highly uncertain about future demand, don't hire and don't buy. Don't own a resource that you're highly uncertain whether you need it in the future. You should rent that, contract that. If you fluctuate in demand today, don't own it, don't hire it, rent it. Give yourself that flexibility. If it's easy to determine the certifications or credentials, think about renting, if it's quick and easy. On the other hand, if you're talking about things where the person or asset plays a critical role in forming and maintaining relationships with the outside world, with customers, you probably want to employ or own or purchase. If it's a role in making what I call tacit decisions, those kind of soft decisions around strategy and identity, senior leaders, you'll want to have those full time. And if it's something that's clearly of strategic importance to you, that sets you apart from others, you'll probably want to own. So begin to think about how you would classify positions based on these kinds of criteria. Now, for the individuals that you want to attract, either in a contract basis or a full-time, what do? And my primary tip is you want to promise asset appreciation. In other words, you want to tell people that working in your organization will build their credentials. I've used a silly little graphic here that says badging, but basically you want to give people a badge for having worked for you for a number of years successfully. So compete for talent based on offering badges. You want to shift the emphasis from talking about here's the cash I'm going to pay you today to here's the future asset value I'm going to build if you work with me. Compete for talent because you're the best source of learning a particular discipline or skill. With others, you may want to develop credentials that you can all depend on, perhaps in your industry, cross-industry credentials. You may want to develop a platform that would facilitate ratings and make it easy for people outside your organization to look at different capabilities. And importantly, look at doing it in a, what I would call, rapid ROI fashion. Don't think about investing in somebody for 5 years with the idea they'll stay with you for 15 so you get payback. Think about teach a little, get a little back. Teach a little, get a little back. A rapid ROI. One of the ways to help with this is to have frequent lateral moves. Remember, if somebody says to you, I'd like to be promoted, they're often telling you, I'm bored with what I'm doing now. It's a polite way to say I'm bored. So redesign career paths so people have more opportunity for more variety and more learning. Remember, security today is about having options. It's not about rising up in an increasingly narrow pyramid, as is shown on the left. It's about the ability to branch out, to do multiple different things, as shown on the right. And feedback becomes essential. Feedback is no longer, by the way, about judging. It's not about telling me I did A or D kind of work. It's about telling me how I could do it better. It's about teaching and providing new challenges. And finally, let's just go back to a word about engaging with meaning. I like to think in 3 layers of messaging. One is what you tell people. That's your stated purpose. And it could be what you tell people in the interview. Why should I come to work here? The second layer is what I interpret when I hear what you've said. Okay, you said I would learn a lot. Well, what do I imagine in my mind when I hear you say that? And the third layer is what actually happens. Now, what I've found is that when people are not engaged, either customers or employees, because it's the same on both sides, the break is typically between what I imagined and what you actually delivered. And of course, to fix that, you can do one of 2 things. You can deliver more or you can promise less. But the key is to close the gap. Make sure you deliver on what you promise. You've probably seen charts like this. This particular set of data came from Gallup, and they say that the work experience becomes less sweet over time. The reason for that, from my research, is really quite straightforward. It's because over the first 6 months, we find out whether our assumptions about what it would be like to work here are true. And we do that because we go to orientation, we have some kind of daily experience, we meet our colleagues, we listen to the leaders, we experience the practices of the company. And 6 months later, we say, this place is not what I expected. This is what you, from an HR perspective, must fight against every day. You must make sure that the organization lives up to the expectations that people have coming in. As leaders, you own the experience, and creating a great experience is a core to creating a collaborative organization.